Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to welcome you to another episode of the Third Eye Production. Today, I'm going to be talking about how the political establishment and the media weaponizes identity politics and the language of progressivism to either derail or de-radicalize progressive agendas into a controlled, non-threatening oppositional to capitalism, exploitation, imperialism, and some possible cognitive solutions we can come up with that can lead to a liberation of the masses. So let's get started. The fundamental principles of propaganda was first defined 100 years ago by Edward Bernays, often referred to as the father of public relations. Joseph Goebbels served as a Rights Minister of Propaganda in Nazi Germany from 1933 to 1945. The stunning successful lessons of Nazi propaganda were not lost on the world's economic and political leaders, but in the post-war era and in the war since then. And the Central Intelligence Agency of the CIA was founded in 1947 for the express purpose of conducting secret intelligence operations that could serve the political aims at the same time they generated huge untraceable profits. To the extent that the CIA's illegal enterprise necessitated the creation and maintenance of permanent ministry of disinformation, managed by our own taxpayer-funded shadow government and the deep state. In retrospect, then, it is clear that these propaganda campaigns have proven so successful that even today few of us realize how ongoing, vast, and widespread they are. Propaganda's efficacy is so indisputable that it is commonly the case that those who are the most certain that they are not among the propagandized are in fact the most overt victims of it. Which is why even if you think you're informed enough to evade being a victim of propaganda, you can still succumb to being duped, which is why constant research is needed to overcome vast amounts of misinformation. Corporate media focus on the stories they are paid to propagate, meaning those which support the financial ideological agendas of their owners, who themselves are, without exception, central parts of a larger ruling oligarchy. If an individual were to insist on learning about any less discussed story, they will soon realize an abundance of relevant facts can easily be found and often hidden in plain sight. But the truth is, the people simply do not want to know or think of any such truth that are different from those that are accepted by their peers, which causes disoriented pain from cognitive dissonance, which keeps them docile, compliant, and being well-paid mouthpieces. The grandest illusions has to be maintained at all costs, and any story that has to be confirmed by experts and free of preconceived manipulation. So here's an excerpt of a late Aaron Russo, explaining what the Rockefellers told him as to why they funded the women's liberation movement in the 1960s. Very interesting. Check this out.
And he started laughing. He said, "Aaron, what do you think women's liberation was about?" And I said, I had pretty conventional thinking about it at that point. I said, I think it's about women having the right to work, getting equal pay with men, just like they won the right to vote. You know, and he started to laugh. He said, "You're an idiot." And I said, "Why am I an idiot?" He said, let me tell you what that was about. We, the Rockefellers, funded that. We funded Women's Lib, you know? And we're the ones who got all over the newspapers and television, the Rockefeller Foundation. He says, and you want to know why? He said, there were two primary reasons. And they were, one reason was we couldn't tax half the population before Women's Lib. And the second reason was, now we get the kids in school at an early age. We can indoctrinate the kids how to think. So it breaks up the family. The kids start looking at the state as the family, as the school, as the officials, as their family, not as the parents teaching them. And so those are the two primary reasons for Women's Lib, which I thought up to that point was a noble thing. You know, when I saw their intentions behind it, where they were coming from when they created it, the thought of it, I saw the evil behind what I thought was a noble venture.
And here's Hillary Clinton being an ambitious mouthpiece of the Rockefeller social engineering agenda when she says, check this out, "I believe the primary role of the state is to teach and train and raise children. Parents have a secondary role." This is an actual quote by Hillary Clinton. by It Takes a Village. So, and there's obviously also a futuristic aspect to this social engineering agenda, which also produces technocratic fascism that consists of thought techniques developed by AI technology that gathers data from individuals to learn behavior patterns and spending habits, that convinces buyers to impulsively buy things they don't need, like the latest iPhone, and believe things that are not true, like controlled speech is free speech, or indoctrination is education, or a plutocracy is a democracy. And here's an excerpt of an interview from an activist researcher, Alison McDowell, explaining what the social engineering of the future will most likely look like. Which is a very interesting take on it. Check this out.
It's important to know that, schools have always compulsory education, and this is what I didn't know at the time, because I've just learned a lot through, my experience connecting with other people, is, ultimately schools are meant to condition the next generation to serve the function of power, largely. That's, powerful interests do not condition lots of free thinkers. There's an elite class that's allowed to be the free thinkers, but most people are just supposed to toe the line, whatever that next industrial need is, right? And if that means moving kids off the farm into factories, if that means moving kids from the factories into cubicles or, call centers, and what's coming next, which is what's coming out of the World Economic Forum the last several years, although it's really been in place since the 70s, is this push towards a global industrially engineered society that is largely run on automation and artificial intelligence and quantum computing and synthetic biology, in which the aim of these very powerful interests that are coming out of the technology and the finance side is to erase physical human bodies and minds as legacy systems and move into finding new ways of extracting value out of this coming generation. And so really the concentration, I'm, in my early 50s, we're hopeless. We're not going to be retrofit really into the system. I'm sure that there's a plan to ultimately sort of jettison us as soon as possible so they don't have to pay our pensions. But it's the children, especially the toddlers, that in this 2030, 2035 time horizon that they have imagined is who they need to capture into Google's box so that they never actually know what life is outside of the box of the technology that's been built around them.
What Allison said reminds me of this Klaus Schwab's quote of the Great Reset. When Schwab predicts, it says, as capabilities in this area improve, the temptation for law enforcement agencies to, and courts to use techniques to determine the likelihood of criminal activity, assesses guilt, or even possibility to retrieve memories directly from the people's brains will increase. Even crossing national border might one day involve a detailed brain scan to assess individual security risk. When there's the ability to brain hack, there's also the ability to implant memories and alter the mind, which I would describe it more like an MK Ultra on steroids, which obviously would be used on minorities as a weaponized tool of finding them guilty even before a crime has been committed. This is what this is basically saying to me. Which reminds me of something I wrote several months ago, and the title of it is called Structural Racism versus Technocratic Rule. Understanding systemic racism is critical in being able to understand why racism is often viewed as a problem for individuals engaging in bigotry, instead of correlating it to a structural problem, which is not only creates a limited view of what racism, white supremacy is, but how it is used against minorities. Like when you see minorities in positions of authority that enforces what Martin Luther King referred to as unjust laws of the people, that is falsely propagated as black progress. Not understanding structural racism will cause the public to not examine it more broadly, like when you see Israel and the U.S. forces training together and they wind up getting away with killing unarmed minorities in their own countries, which is not coincidental. And if police officers report fellow officers for wrongdoing, they will most likely get demoted, fired, or even seen as a traitor to their comrades or their colleagues, which is why most officers will look the other way rather than risk destroying their careers and telling on their fellow officers. which is a good example as to why they project racism and white supremacy as an individual issue rather than a structural problem. The narrative defunding the police will ultimately come down to reducing the police to justify the implementation of technocratic police state using artificial intelligence like contact tracing, human tracking technology that are already in use, like the smart surveillance camera technology that has the capacity to produce the kind of results in 2 hours that would normally take several officers 4 or 5 days to produce, which would give the defunded police activists a sense of progress by the reduction of police they would see on the streets, but it will be justified by the automation of jobs through artificial intelligence, which is why the military are using more drones and robots and other artificial intelligence instead of more troops, which will obviously result in a technocratic police state using a contact tracing technology. Coincidentally, comes out of Israel, which happens to be one of the biggest lobbying groups in Washington, AIPAC, which also brings up another issue of how they manipulate people, and why also how capitalism demonizes socialism and economic democracy. And let me explain what I'm talking about here real quickly. Fascism is based off of controlling people, which requires the right conditions and mindset to be able to achieve it. Like, for example, to legitimize slavery, you have to devalue a good portion of humans. And to legitimize hierarchical capitalism, you have to devalue a good portion of jobs. To legitimize exploitation, you have to produce economic inequality, which capitalism uses as a tool of control, is a direct contradiction to an economic democracy, self-governance, and self-determination. And another thing they actually do in terms of weaponizing the language of progressivism is that they actually take the definition of progressive words and use it against progressives, is when they give us, for example, a watered-down, weaponized version of socialism as only meaning a welfare state of dependency, while conveniently leaving out the other part of the definition, collective ownership and control of productions, which is actually a part of the economic socialism. That's what that really is, economic socialism or collectivism. They conveniently leave that out, which is not surprising. It's all part of the weaponization and the demonization process to control society, which I think is worth mentioning. The great scholar Dr. Niem Akbar book, Breaking the Chains of Psychological Slavery, which will help to create the ability to think, do and think outside the narratives of those who subjugate us, in which I'm going to show and highlight a couple of great prolific thinkers and scholars that are not well known in the United States, like Paulo Freire and Murray Bookchin. You can listen to this extended version of it on my Spotify channel if you want to hear the extended version of it, which is actually full of a lot of information. So I would advise tuning into that and listening to the extended version of it. So I'd like to thank you for watching, and I would like to say, remember, individual empowerment is designed to suppress the success of the majority, and collective empowerment is designed to suppress the success of the authorities. Power to the people.